thank you very much, and welcome to my talk, Apocalypse in the Old Neighborhood, Fantasies of Longtermism in Starfield, and other space-themed digital games. My name is Mario Donick, and I am, among other things, a freelance author. I studied German language and history, then I got a PhD in communication studies, and I do various game study things, mostly in my spare time. This is my fifth rock, and finally, after many, many years, I'm here, actually not just online, and I'm very excited to be here. So, this is Earth. In the year 2330, and one of the few buildings whose ruins still exist. This building is the US Bank skyscraper in a location which we know as Los Angeles today. The game is Starfield. A very hated game. In Starfield, Earth's magnetosphere has been destroyed completely by faster than light travel experiments in Earth orbit. So people wanted to build spaceships which can jump to other space systems, solar systems, and this destroyed Earth. Well, in contrast to the Fallout series, Earth became a complete desert. Except a few big landmarks, nothing survived the man-made apocalypse. So you really only find such skyscraper ruins in Starfield's Earth, and maybe some kind of snowballs which you can collect. Well, humanity itself was not completely lost. A few thousand people were lucky or wealthy enough to make it into rescue ships. They jumped to our nearest neighboring star system, Alpha Centauri. From there, mankind started to settle space. The jump drive problems got fixed in between, so everything is fine. But our home system is, well, like this. Well, not exactly. We have Mars and Titan colonies still left, but these are only used for finding resources in mines. Our new home is Alpha Centauri. Earth is empty and a quite depressing sight. And it is depressing to me, especially as a player, because it is Earth which we face here, and it is nothing like our real, vibrant, colorful, living planet. Earth is our home. Another game, X4 Foundations, calls it Cradle of Humanity in one DLC. This is, of course, a famous quote by Konstantin Tsiolkovsky, one of the space and rocket pioneers. In a letter he wrote, "The Earth is the cradle of humanity, but mankind cannot stay in the cradle forever. But one can wonder if Earth is really just a cradle which we really need to leave." Hannah Arendt pointed out that Earth is the only place in the universe where human beings find their natural living conditions without the need for technical support. We have air to breathe, water to drink, food to collect or grow or hunt, temperatures required to stay alive. Humans as biological beings which developed under very specific conditions and in entire ecosystems require these conditions and systemic relations to endure. We do not exist outside of Earth. Or, if we do, we need complex technical systems to survive the journey. Arendt spoke of a rebellion of man against his own existence. She wrote this in her book Vita Activa shortly after the Sputnik shock, when a Soviet cosmonaut left Earth for the very first time. Now, decades later, commercial space companies like SpaceX, like here in this picture, Blue Origin, and Virgin Galactic start to exploit space for profit, thereby pushing scientific goals in the background. Governmental space agencies such as NASA and ESA have become dependent on services provided by SpaceX. Ambitious programs like Artemis for revisiting the moon don't function without SpaceX rockets. And just a few days ago, an ESA mission to an asteroid was launched with a SpaceX rocket as well. The mission was part of a study on how to protect Earth from potentially devastating asteroid impacts. So the publicly funded ESA in Europe had to pay money to a commercial company for this task. In some ways, of course, SpaceX is a fitting choice. Its owner, Elon Musk, is not just a libertarian Trump supporter, but also a so-called long-termist. In simple terms, long-termism emphasizes the well-being of humanity in the long run, in contrast to caring about the well-being of currently living persons or their direct short-term descendants. In this ideology, protecting mankind as a species from very dangerous events such as the aforementioned asteroids, but also nuclear wars, pandemics, or the development of super-intelligent AI systems. When the total destruction of Earth, or at least our required living conditions on Earth, are a real possibility, the idea to spread among the stars to other planets seems reasonable in this view. The basic unsuitability of space environments, artificial environments, and other planets is not seen as a real problem here. Technological advancements are expected to allow adapting mankind to their new homes. So long-termism means transhumanism in a sense, but this is not seen as a rebellion against existence, as Arendt put it, but simply as enhancing existence, to ensure existence outside Earth, outside the cradle. By the way, Elon Musk has, of course, started a company which is also trying to pursue these kind of tasks. His company Neuralink attempts to develop brain-computer interfaces, which in the long run should enable humans to better cope with evil AI systems. And this is, he means this serious. But space colonization is Musk's main interest in these fields, and he works on it. You may have heard of Starlink, a satellite-based internet system. As many internet services, it has certain terms of use, terms of conditions, which you need to accept. Section 11 is about the governing law. While on Earth or the Moon, the laws of the US state of California apply. But once you leave Earth, the vicinity of Earth, you accept that Mars is an independent planet, where any conflicts, quote, will be settled through self-governing principles established in good faith at the time of Martian settlement. You accept this when you buy Starlink now and use it now. I find this both funny and worrying. The Starlink terms are an attempt to codify Elon Musk's libertarian fantasies of a private space colony government. This sounds like a bad video game, but it is reality. But maybe he just wants to cosplay space games. I don't know. So when we look at many space games which were created since the 80s, the default mode of many of these games is that of a freelancer, working as a freelancer. Players take the role of a trader or an industrialist to earn money and military power in order to earn even more money and even more power. This was already the core gameplay in Elite from 1984 and somewhat prototypical for many space games. Elite gameplay was rather simple. It mostly impressed with the fast 3D vector graphics and the huge procedurally generated universe with hundreds of stars and planets. In 2014, a more modern version was published. The basic game loop is still similar to the original Elite, but of course space looks much more realistic, and even Earth, although we cannot land on it. 2 years after the original Elite, another, for its time, impressive early space game was released, Starflight. It was a space trading RPG, and in fact had many similarities to Starfield. The single spaceship, of course, was shown in a simple top-down view. The goal was to find resources for the few survivors of a civilization that was nearly destroyed. Over the course of the game, you will find out that your civilization's home planet is endangered by star anomalies. So the star creates some disturbances, and this will destroy the planet. You also find out that the so-called Old Empire came from a completely destroyed Earth our Earth. So mankind survived Earth's apocalypse thanks to space travel. This is the Sega Mega Drive or Genesis version from 1991 with much better graphics and still fun to play today. So in the long time between 1984 and 2024, nothing really has changed in how digital games approach space. We still use space as a backup for survival. We still exploit space for resources or wealth. We still have to kill enemies and so on. The sometimes implied, sometimes shown, questionable living conditions of the normal people are taken for granted in such games and can't be changed. I've observed closely, many space games actually show quite dystopic scenarios. Which brings me to Starfield again, and now a bit more in detail. As I said, in 2330, the capital of mankind's first new home planet is in Alpha Centauri. It's named New Atlantis. And New Atlantis, on first sight, feels like a shiny, clean, orderly city with high buildings, expensive shops and restaurants, many parks, the sun is always shining, really nice. And it has an actual museum about the history of Earth's destruction and the following events. The end of Earth, yeah. Of course, this museum is just one side of the story, but the basic point is that a few thousand privileged people survived Earth's destruction by getting sent away in one of the few spaceships. They travel to Alpha Centauri, where they ensure humanity's continued existence. We later learn that it took about 50 years to prepare this exodus, and of course, in this time, conflicts arose, which led to the split of mankind into factions. Very Bethesda-like. We have the United Colonies, which are somewhat proto-fascist, very rule-abiding and bureaucratic meritocracy, where only persons who serve the state are granted citizenship. And with citizenship comes affordable health care, the right to rent or buy an apartment, and I'm not quite sure, actually, maybe also voting rights. I think at some point the game says the government is elected or the president is elected, but it's not a parliament type of government. It's not a typical democracy like a Western country democracy is formed. As a contrast, we have the Freestar Collective, basically a libertarian mixture of USA-like frontier myth and cyberpunk dystopia. The Freestar Collective are composed of a bunch of corporate towns, mega corporations, and independent traders. The rulers of these towns are CEOs, bosses of corporations, and most of the time they can do what they want, exploit workers, sell drugs, perform shady business practices, and so on. Everything, well, maybe people like the one I mentioned in the beginning dream of. The last big faction is House the Room, and in the game this is basically the same type of run-of-your-mill crazy religious cult we spoke yesterday already about. None of these three states is a liberal democracy as we would understand this term today. Apparently, the select few survivors of Earth's destruction either thought that really democratic forms do not fit their new situation, or maybe they weren't big fans of equality and liberal rights. Anyway, the problem is that everywhere in Starfield, the economic and social conditions for the majority of people are really bad, except for either obedient servants of the state or for rich families with a long heritage. A good thing about Starfield, which I really like, is that the game is quite effective in showing us the various problems. We see goods distribution problems, poverty, health issues, loneliness, depression, injustice, corporate greed, and many other problems, and a bit more shown in a more serious way than maybe it is shown in other Bethesda games. And we even talk to many NPC characters, which speak a lot about these problems. And they even comment on it on their own frequently. And one NPC in particular Marika really wants to change things for the better, only that she doesn't. Because the developers of Starfield stopped at the descriptive level. People in the game know it's really bad, they suffer, they talk about it, but they can't act. And what is much worse for a game, we as a player can't act either. The issue with the very unpopular Starfield is, in my opinion, not that it is boring. Maybe it is. Many people say it is boring. But my main concern is that it denies us agency where agency is needed the most, at this basic living condition level, which I as a player want to improve, but I can't. In a review of Starfield, Jade King put it this way: I wish more quests and character motives were about rebelling and changing the systems of Starfield's world instead of nicely operating within them. I want to change things, not reinforce societal archetypes that ensure those on top remain immovable, while everyone beneath must struggle to make ends meet. Some players created mods in the meantime to kill the bad corporate guys. Now, Starfield is just one example, and at least it admits the problems of space societies. But other space games don't do this at all. Here's a screenshot of a space cattle farm in X4 Foundations. Maybe you can see the little cattle, the tiny little cows there, under a dome of a space station detached from their natural planetary environment. X4 is an open-ended space economy simulation played in first person. It feels like a mixture of Elite, Transport Tycoon, and Stellaris. And X4's game world is not as depressing as Starfield's. And I think one main reason is because Earth still exists and is relatively healthy and safe. Earth's government is a xenophobic bunch of paranoid racists, but the planet exists. But Earth, anyway, is just one faction, one of the many factions. Factions go frequently to war against each other, and of course also against a super intelligent AI which wants to eliminate all biological life. This is all dynamically simulated by the game. As players, we trade with goods, we build ships, we build even large fleets if we want to, and try to either become an empire of our own or to support factions in their war efforts. We also explore, but exploration is mostly for finding resources and good trading opportunities. As long as the war goes on, the economy thrives. War. X4's universe is colorful, and the general mood, despite the wars, is lighter than in Starfield. Unlike Starfield, though, we cannot even pretend to land on the beautiful planets we see everywhere. In X4, we are always and forever trapped in our ships and space stations, exactly like the cattle I showed earlier. In X4, this is a pure gameplay decision. In the story, millions of people live on planets, but we cannot reach them. The planets which we see all the time but cannot reach remind us of our natural conditions, but do not allow us, space-faring beings, to come back to our cradle. So in its own way, X4 creates an atmosphere of solitude despite a very lively traffic everywhere. The basic condition for human existence is out of reach. On the other hand, the game reassures us that going into space was the correct decision for mankind, because mankind has become very resilient against all the wars. Neither the factions nor the evil AIs are able to completely destroy us, because we and all the other factions are spread out over such a large galaxy. And so we as a player can happily exploit all the resources of that galaxy. A change of the war scenario for peace or war economy into peace economy is not possible. Like in Starfield, we cannot act as heroes in a political sense. As heroes, we were observable in a public political sphere, acting, not just working, not just producing. But this is not possible. And to conclude, both old and current space games let players work and produce in dangerous, exploitative, and partly oppressive systems, but the games do not allow players to act against these systems. Gameplay loops in these games depend on working and producing, but acting against the system would end the implemented gameplay loop because games do not account for players who play against the system. In X4, you can of course try to play in a way where it ends the war, but then the game comes to a stop. The end of war is not part of a simulation. So space games confirm how we currently work and produce in our real world, but maybe we could need more games which overcome these old patterns, which threw away that old tech in the future will save us, so we don't need to act right now pattern. Or in other words, games which put Earth into our reach again. Thanks a lot.